866. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Colin, wake up, Colin. Thanksgiving's over. Too much turkey for Colin Donovan.
Well, here's a trick question.
Yes.
Who won the Iron Bowl?
Oh, that's a good one. It's being played this afternoon, isn't it?
No, it's actually next week. So,
Oh,
is it
okay.
this afternoon?
Or Saturday? Tomorrow. I think it's
That's
tomorrow.
right.
It's tomorrow.
It is tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Okay. Anyway, now that we've confused ourselves more than we've confused the listeners, which is hard to imagine, but this is a very special edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday. We're taping this ahead of time so that Colin can spend his recuperative Friday recuperating from all of the turkey that he ate on Thanksgiving Day. So we won't be taking your phone calls today, but keep that number handy because we'll need it again a week from today. But we're going to try to tackle a couple of emails during the show today. We've also got some callers that were left over from previous programs that have been gracious enough to allow us to give them a call. And we're going to start with one of those right now, and that's Roxanne in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Roxanne, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hello?
Hello, Roxanne.
Yes, I didn't know if you were saying it was me or not.
It is.
Okay,
Yeah.
here's what I would like to know. I have worldview problems because I've been mentally ill for like bipolar disorder and some other things for about 20 years, and I've been a Catholic for 7. I went to college and I studied religion and then Christianity, and I don't understand a lot of things about the church, but I do trust. I've come to the point of trust in the magisterium, and I became Catholic. Mm-hmm. But I still struggle with this issue of how to understand the psychological problems that I have or that maybe, other people have. I got my degree in psychology because I wanted to understand, why am I behaving this way?
Sure.
Why do I do what I do?
Absolutely.
And the problem is wrestling with the worldviews because, in order to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you have to have 5 of 9 symptoms. But these symptoms are essentially like sinful kinds of things, like poor judgment sexually and with money and, that sort of thing, thinking more highly of yourself than you ought. I mean, all the things that you can essentially prevent if you're trying not to sin. And it seems like so many times, I hear it's like cancer, your mental illness. Well, it's not really. It's behavioral, and also I hear, well, like God loves you and you have, you just have a psychological problem. And honestly, is that saying that it's biological then? Because even in the psychological community, some people think it's biological. Other people think it's cognitive or behavioral, which is more, I think, in line with a Christian view. Mm-hmm. So I want the theologian's view on this.
Yeah. Well,
It's probably a both and more than
I think that's correct, Jack. That is really both and for this reason that we're not a perfectly functioning machine. That's what the fall is all about. That we were created to be perfect. In other words, that our body and soul would have a perfect unity between the two, and that the divine life within us would give us, as it were, the motive power for all the virtuous acts that we would have to do and to keep everything in order and in balance. But the sin of Adam and Eve means that this is not how we're conceived, it's not how we're born, and it's not how we're lived. And even once we're baptized, we are still very much, as the Pope likes to say, in a hospital for sinners trying to recover from that. Now, one thing we know, then this is a consequence of the fall too, obviously, because our Earth is exposed to gamma rays and all kinds of things. We know that there's chromosome damage, and a lot of studies are coming out in the last decade, especially because of in the area of genetics, and different mutations in our genome being related to different problems. Some of them are physical problems, celiac disease or hypothyroidism or all kinds. And some of them are mental issues. And we know that mental issues can run in families. And this explains why there is this, biological disposition to these things. Now, a biological disposition does not really take all of the steam out of our volition, in other words, our will, And so there is the personal behavioral dimension of things too. But a lot of it depends on what you know and when. If you're a little child and you're following, not only you're in a family and you're in a family with mental disease, and you're in a family that's socializing you to live like a family with mental disease, you have both behavioral and biological basis for your problem. And, maybe you're a strong individual who can say no to these things and march straight, or you struggle with them. So I'm not sure that you can ever say black and white, and this is where I think the theology is especially strong. Because the church says that for something to be culpable sin, something can be objectively wrong, but we have no moral culpability for it because we don't know it's objectively wrong. So the child who's led to believe that stealing, he's a family of thieves, and they learn to shoplift and do all of this stuff, and they get patted on their back at home for what they were able to steal from the department store. That child doesn't know any better until they get out and awaken in the world and, wow, this is wrong. I never understood that before. So we have the thing can be seriously wrong, but we don't know it. We may not have the power of will to act upon the knowledge that we have. So it's an intellectual knowledge issue, and it's a volitional will strength issue or freedom of will. And then finally, the circumstances can play into that as well. And so I think for people who are mental ill, it's going to be very hard in particular cases to sort out what's biological, what's behavioral. There can also be people who come from perfectly physically and biologically and morally healthy backgrounds who fall into a pattern of sin which basically destroys them physically and mentally, and then obviously there's great culpability there if they have made moral choices to get to this point of mental and moral disintegration in their life. So I think it is a very complex problem. And I think, to be led by therapists to take honestly that they're not, I'm assuming they're not feeding you pablum just to make you feel good about yourself, but they're honestly assessing each patient's background and these issues. They see their strengths and weaknesses. They see where they can help them with, maybe the volitional element, the behavioral element, and maybe in part where it's a question of chemistry, brain chemistry, and something can be done there. So I think, Roxanne, it's a very complex issue, both biologically, mentally, and spiritually. And I think from God's perspective, He's looking at the goodwill of the person. As long as you're struggling and manifesting goodwill, and you're not maliciously saying, I'll do what I want and I'm going to do it, but you're trying to do the right thing even though illness or other circumstances are driving you in a different direction. You're trying, and God is looking at that and will be pleased with that.
Well, and I think the fact that she's willing to seek these answers head on the way she is evidence of the grace of God at work in her life.
That's right, and it's going to be, for all of us, just to get by original sin. The reason there are so few canonized saints in the church is to get to that degree of moral and personal integration is the work of a lifetime and usually involves very hard and difficult choices, most people don't want to do, of what they will give up for love of God and neighbor. And you look at the saints, it's not just the only people in heaven, however. There's the rest of us who have goodwill, who bumble through life, and we get to the judgment with Christ, and He says, well done, good and faithful servant, but you need a little polishing, so go to purgatory, and when you're out, you'll be blessed in the kingdom. I think that is the story of most people. Certainly, probably most of the baptized, and that is it's the struggle, and the struggle in many ways is the measure of our fidelity to what we believe about God and the gospel.
Thanks so much for the phone call, Roxanne. We certainly admire you, and be assured that we will keep you in our prayers. Straight ahead, we're going to talk to Alma in Portland, Oregon, and Wilda in Georgia. And we'll continue on a very special Friday after Thanksgiving edition of Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
A moment with Mother.
You're not supposed to put a shortwave network on the mountain. Matt took me up. He said, we got some land that we could buy about 200 acres, but it's on the wrong place. So we go up there. I get out of the car. I saw St. Michael just standing there. And I said, we'll buy it. He said, Mother, it's the wrong place. I said, we'll buy it. But you don't put shortwave networks on the mountain. I said, do you see St. Michael there? He said, no, we'll buy it. He said, okay. The first day we were on the air, we got a letter from Japan 2 weeks later saying, I got your signal. We weren't even aiming in that direction. And he said, I like your network for Buddhist prayer. I said, Buddhist prayer? It was the rosary here. I said, let him say the rosary, Lord, he won't know.
This is Al Cresta, host of Cresta in the Afternoon, and Cresta in the Afternoon looks at all of life through the lens of Scripture and the teaching of the Catholic Church. Church teaching is the light by which we view the world, and so we'll explore everything, from abortion to Hollywood, and from the First Amendment to the United Nations, and everything in between. Following St. Paul, we're seeking transformation through the renewing of our minds. So that's Cresta in the Afternoon with me, Al Cresta, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Podcasts of Open Line are available within 24 hours of live broadcast. Go to EWTN.com and click on Multimedia.
Hello, this is Bishop Robert Baker from the Diocese of Birmingham in Alabama, and you're listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Welcome back to a very special Friday after Thanksgiving edition of EWTN's Open Line with Colin Donovan. We won't be taking your phone calls today, but we are going to talk to a couple callers that we have not been able to get to on previous shows. Next up is Alma in Portland, Oregon. She listens on Mater Day FM 88.3. Alma, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi. My question is more along the lines of politics. I'm having just trouble with the whole political system. Recently, we've gone back to the Catholic faith, and we're very blessed as a family to have made that decision together. However, looking at both Republican and Democratic side with the elections coming up soon, we realize that both parties aren't conducive to, I feel like, what the Catholic values teach. So we know that on the Democratic side, they're pro-choice and they pretty much back abortions, which is terrible. However, on the Republican side, they don't. They call themselves pro-life. However, they back organizations and corporations that go into other countries and pretty much commit the same type of atrocities. So we just want to know what the Catholic standing is on politics.
The point is, I think, mostly what is the priority? What is the central values to be protected? And if you think about it, a policy issue, whether it's an element of economic justice, of health care for the indigent or whatever, these are certainly great values. These are the values certainly related to life and so on and so forth. And these certainly are those things which have the appearance of being espoused by one party more than by the other. I'm not sure that holds up to critical analysis. If you give money to the poor and it makes them subservient to government and they never have any degree of independence from government, or they never acquire self-responsibility, the old adage that if you give a man a fish, you're going to have to give him a fish every day. If you teach him how to fish, he'll go get his own, and your care of him will come to an end because he will care for himself. Care for self builds dignity and self-sufficiency and all of that. And so I'm not sure that the claim of being the more socially justice party is actually valid. And then there is the other element of those things where one party more than another also supports the pro-life issue more than the other, the pro-marriage issue more than the other, the pro-family, if you mean the natural family, not perfectly, but more than the other, whereas the other party seems to be totally not oblivious, but actually aggressively against life by support of abortion, support of Planned Parenthood, against family by support for gay marriage and pushing that through and getting judges in who will do that. Support for the family. Again, do we have families that stick together and where the parents are supporting the children, or families which are dependent upon government, or families which have to break up and go their separate ways because that's the only way that they can live? So it depends on a deeper analysis. The biggest principle is this: there are certain moral issues which never offer a maybe or it's okay, and you can never take the life of someone, the innocent, between conception and natural death. In other words, euthanasia at one end, abortion at the other. Gay marriage is contrary to not only the law of God, but the law of nature, and therefore support for that, even though now we have it in this country. That's an essential value. Opposing that is an essential value. And the other things are policy. How do we assist the poor? How do we provide medical insurance? How do we defend the country? How do we defend it? Provide for the military, provide for veterans, provide this, that. Most of these things are policy issues on which the parties disagree, or agree in general, but then disagree as to the means and the motives. On the essential things, there is a great divide between the parties. So while no party in this country is perfect, at least one of them seems to hold the essential values of the faith and plays lip service to the other values of life of the faith without actually holding them very well either. When it comes to voting, there will be things in both parties that you don't like. And if you vote for somebody because he's pro-life, but maybe he is, not so good on refugees or on minimum wage or on health care, well, at least there will be living people who wouldn't otherwise have gotten health care or minimum wage, whatever the number is, because they're alive because of that candidate. On the other hand, if you vote for a candidate who says, oh yeah, abortion is nothing, it's a woman's decision, it doesn't matter, let's depopulate the country, we can always bring in migrants and others to fill the gap, which essentially seems to be the policy of that party, then if you vote for them, then possibly you're voting that abortion is perpetuated. So I don't think you can do that. You have to decide at minimum for the lesser of evils. And so you pick the candidate who holds the essential values that you have as a Catholic, as a Christian, even though you realize on other things he may be deficient in your view, rather than the candidate who doesn't hold your essential values, but you agree with him on the non-essential things. The lesser of evils in that case is the candidate who is faithful on the more central issues of human existence. Life from conception to natural death. Marriage as willed by God and always present in nature, the only way that's ever been present in nature until governments began to rule otherwise. Those are the essential values. And you can add into all of that religious liberty, because without religious liberty, and without the government telling churches what they may believe and whether they may act according to it, you will not have any of the other rights. So I think we've got three there: family, marriage, and religious life, marriage, and religious liberty that are essential values that you ought to vote for, even if it means voting, maybe holding your nose a little bit because some of the positions of a particular candidate.
And Alma, also, you may go to EWTN.com/voting.asp. EWTN.com/voting.asp, and that'll give you a real nice document on a lot of the things Colin just talked about. Next stop for us is Georgia. Wilda is listening online in Georgia. Wilda, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Colin is waiting for your question.
Okay, my question is this. For Baptists, the two Baptists got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
One of them wants to remarry in a Catholic church. However, he wants to understand why he has to have annulment.
Mm-hmm.
And because he has an annulment, why it's taking so long.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll answer the first part of that. I'll take a best stab at the second part of that. The first part of that is the church doesn't get to pick and choose between marriages to say are valid or not. The church gives the two Baptists the presumption that they at least intended on their wedding day to marry. And if they did, it's under the same rules that apply to Catholic. You know, Moses said to you, divorce, you can remarry, but I say to you, no. This is Jesus' words, not mine. So the church would look at a second marriage as bigamous, essentially, and adultery to boot, if it simply did not presume that the marriage of two Baptists, of two Jews, of a Baptist and a Catholic, of a whomever and a whomever, are simply as they were in the Garden of Eden, a man and a woman standing up and say, until death do us part. And on that basis, the church says you're married, and we accept you as married, and we presume you're married, unless you can give us reasons why that standing up was invalid. And that's what the annulment process is for, to investigate whether it was what is presumed a marriage, and ought to be presumed such, was actually a marriage. And it wouldn't be if one of the parties didn't intend the purposes of marriage. If a party stood up before the altar, before the minister, whatever, let's say the Baptist minister or even a justice of the peace, and said, till death do us part, but in the back of their mind, they think, well, I'll give it a year or two. That was not a marriage. You didn't intend what your words expressed. Or that you married for the purposes of marriage, which most people understand to be children. Sadly, in our day, that's not so clearly true, but you go into a marriage thinking, well, life is fun. We're not going to have children because it's more fun not to have children. That's not a marriage either. And if those facts were to come out, the church can say that was not a marriage. Or competency, or a shotgun marriage, or sickness or whatever that predisposed somebody to, weaken the will and enable them not to make a good, solid decision. Those are the kinds of things that the church would look into in the annulment process regarding that first marriage, which she presumes to be valid.
And Wilda, hang on the line. Colin has more to say about this. We'll also talk to Pat in the great state of Illinois as we continue with our very special Friday after Thanksgiving edition of EWTN's Open Line with EWTN's Vice President of Theology, Mr. Colin Donovan.
It's the start of a new day for Morning Catholic Radio.
Another thing to rediscover is there are just some things we used to call them acts of God. One time I had a very angry parishioner who was pointing to the parking lot and blaming me for all this ice at the other end. It had rained and it was freezing rain overnight. And I looked back at her and I said, I swear I didn't do it.
Morning Glory, Catholic from the start. Weekday mornings, 7 Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
I have a word for singles who are getting a bit older and are dating. I've met many of you who are waiting for that experience of being swept off your feet and finding the one. Stop putting that kind of emotional pressure on yourself. One of the reasons young lovers are swept off their feet is because they're still young. They're figuring out who they are, where they fit in the world, and what to do with their lives. They just left mom and dad a few years ago. They get swept off their feet easily because they're not all that stable. As you get older and more established, you know yourself. You meet potential spouses and love unfolds in a different sort of way, a more peaceful way, one that puts solid friendship first. And like it is with a seasoned married couple, the fire of love isn't always as impassioned as you grow older, but it's deeper and in many ways far more beautiful. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Is your marriage in trouble? Before you give up hope, go to helpourmarriage.com and check out a program called Retrouvaille. It's a French word meaning rediscover, and it could be the key to rebuilding a stable and loving marriage. It starts with a weekend where you and your spouse will learn how to re-establish communication. You'll hear stories of reconciliation and healing from teen couples who've experienced the pain of a troubled marriage. Go to helpourmarriage.com for more information on Retrouvaille.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question or comment, call 1-800-585-9396. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Thanks for tuning in to a very special Friday after Thanksgiving edition of EWTN's Open Line. We're not taking your phone calls live today, but we are talking to Wilda in the great state of Georgia. And Colin, you had a little more to say about Wilda's question.
Yeah, she was asking, first of all, why a Baptist couple would need an annulment for one of them to get married in the church. And then also why it would take so long. The gentleman obviously has gone through and applied for the annulment. You know, there's the investigation, there's the taking of testimonies, and then there's the judgment of it. And once the judgment is made, it's passed to a second court. This is a notoriously difficult process for people. And I think it's one of the reasons that Pope Francis has tried to bring some efficiencies into it. Not all canonists agree with what he's proposing in terms of the process. But I think the intention is precisely to deal with the length of time, sometimes a couple years or even longer in more difficult cases. And some of that is determined by appeals, too, because you can get the decision and one of the spouses might appeal to Rome or something like that. So, well, that's about the only reason. It'll be particular to either case, the volume of work being done by a particular tribunal, the reviews that are necessary, and especially if there's a recourse to Rome or something like that. And it's just the inherent nature of the process.
Well, and there also could be turnover within the tribunal. You know,
yeah, that's true. Then somebody has to get up to speed on the case.
The perceived vocations crisis here in America affects us on a lot of different levels, and you know, the lack of priests requires necessary movement from time to time.
And I saw an article recently of how the Francis's reforms might benefit small dioceses that can't impanel a tribunal by having potentially even a regional tribunal of a number of small dioceses together. And so I know we have some of the people who have over time worked on our Q&A forums in the canon law section. Many of them are canon lawyers, and they are reviewing cases from dioceses other than the one they're in, simply because of the volume of work that some dioceses have. So I think the Pope is right about having to bring greater justice. And here justice, you know, like I hate to compare it with criminality, but in the United States you have a right to a quick trial. But in the tribunal system, that right is only as good as the mechanism and the amount of effort required to get it through the system. And hopefully the reforms will not err too much on the other way in terms of a perceived laxity or an actual laxity, but rather hit the mark in terms of an efficiency which also gives a correct decision.
We're going to talk to Pat now, who's listening in Illinois on Sirius XM Channel 130. Pat, thanks for calling back. You're on with Colin Donovan. Hi, Pat. Are you there?
Oh, yes, I am.
Go right ahead with your question for Colin.
Okay. My question is, years ago, we were, as Catholics, allowed to have the last rite, which was, be able to get the last rites if we had somebody dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been told that since Vatican II that they don't do that anymore, and all they do is they bless you for sick when you're sick. Is that true?
No, not at all. I don't know what the person
Somebody's
would be
pulling your
thinking.
leg, Pat.
Yeah, no.
Somebody's pulling my leg.
Yeah.
So,
First of all, there are two things involved here. One is the sacrament of the sick, which used to be called extreme unction. In other words, the anointing at the last moment. And so when they saw the priest coming, usually the patient, starts to tremble because, they wait till the last minute and get the priest there for absolution. Today, you still have to be seriously ill or in going upon an operation or something like that, which always entails the possibility of dying. You can get anointing of the sick. Now, when a person comes to the actual hour of their death, let's say they were anointed on Monday and they have a crisis on Tuesday, and the doctors say there's no hope, it's only a matter of hours, and the priest comes in. Again, he would anoint them again, but he would go through all of the rites, not just the sacrament of the sick, but there is a blessing, there's the apostolic pardon, is what we're talking about there. If the person is conscious, there's viaticum, the Holy Eucharist for the way, for the journey, which is the meaning of viaticum. If necessary, before all of that, and again, if the person is conscious, they would do even sacrament of penance before anointing of the sick, before viaticum, before the apostolic blessing. So altogether, this would be considered
and
the
all
last
of them
rites.
In their own rights, beautiful rights.
They are. And then if the person were to die, then there is the commendation of the dead person and the prayers associated with that. So that's still done. I saw it done with my dad. Father Mitch actually was the one who came to give him anointing of the sick. We knew he was in his last hours, and Father had just finished anointing him. And like a minute later, he passed away. And so Father Pacua did then the commendation as well. So he got really all of the last rites within about 30 minutes. So that was a tremendous blessing for me and, for him as well. But that's still done, and that's never not been done. The only thing was changed was the conditions or the circumstances on which the priest normally would give the sacrament of the sick. They're looser only in the sense that one doesn't have to be in the ultimate minute, in extremis. But if one has a sickness which is to death, or entering into a surgery which might lead to death, or have old age and fragility which could, any time produce death, then those are the kinds of circumstances in which now the sacrament of the sick will be given, in addition to the very last hours as parts of the last rites.
Does that clear things up for you, Pat?
Well, yeah. What is it called? Is it called the vernacular blessing, or what's it called?
Apostolic.
Apostolic?
Apostolic.
Now, that's what would be given if death was relatively certain.
Yes, it's
apostolic.
Right. It's a papal benediction. It's every priest is entitled to give it at the hour of death within that period of time. And so any priest who comes to give the sacrament and the other elements, viaticum, the Eucharist, or to hear confession in those circumstances, when he does the last rites, they get the apostolic benediction, which comes with a plenary indulgence that is applicable to them, obviously, at the moment in life they need it the most.
Thanks, Pat, so much for joining the program. We appreciate it. We've got an email here from Karen, and she says, Dear Mr. Donovan, I've never written to a radio host before, but I was so distressed over calls I heard on EWTN radio, comments at my women's Bible study, and questions my husband said were raised at his men's prayer group that I wanted to speak up. Perhaps the request is unnecessary since you already plan to address it, but I feel it was important enough to specifically ask. Could you please spend an extended amount of time clarifying what the Pope means when he says he will, quote-unquote, concede to all priests for the Jubilee year the discretion to absolve the sin of abortion, those who have procured it and who, with contrite heart, seek forgiveness for it? And she goes on to talk about how the media is portraying that, but that's the essence of the question.
Yeah, and time passes, but we still get this kind of question because the secular media is actually no help in understanding. And others, I've heard women say, I am outraged that if a woman had an abortion, the church is supposed to be pro-life, that they couldn't get absolution until now. Well, the truth of the matter is that's not at all what's going on here. In the case of abortion, the priest has the duty, because there is an excommunication attached to it, to find out whether that excommunication was incurred, and if it wasn't, like the woman, I guess if the woman were to say, oh, I didn't know that you could be excommunicated for that, then you know that it wasn't incurred, and she could be absolved. But on occasion, yes, I knew that. I thought that's a bunch of malarkey on the church's part, and it didn't keep me from getting the abortion at all. Well, there would be a case where you knew that the excommunication did pertain. And there it's referred to the bishop's office or to a confessor who can grant it, and then the person would be first absolved of the excommunication and also absolved of the sin of killing their child. So that would be probably a fairly rare case. A very noted canonist recently wrote that it's unlikely that many women actually incurred the excommunication. They don't know about it, especially girls might have been not reached the canonical age of 16, and therefore they can't incur it. There could be all kinds of reasons, force and fear of the will brought by parents and others, that they had to have this abortion. So there can be all kinds of reasons why very few women, unless there was some malice there and not caring what the church thought and not caring about the life of the child, that they would have incurred it. So in those few cases, it would have had to have been referred. But that's only even in some places, because many bishops automatically delegated that to every priest. So even before Pope Francis gave this merciful permission, it was already being done. For instance, I believe the entire Franciscan order had this possibility. It was already being done in many dioceses of the United States and probably around the world, where every priest had the faculty to absolve from abortion, from the excommunication of abortion, and then immediately the sin as well. So that's really the status. So a lot of it is sort of a trumped up thing. In reality, the Pope is trying to get this practice into every corner of the church, at least for the Year of Mercy, and perhaps, who knows, maybe they'll change the Code of Canon Law, removing the abortion. But there are good reasons for that, because it is a particularly evil act, whether the person is fully culpable of it or not, because it involves an innocent person, a person who is totally defenseless, and it perpetuates a malice in our particular culture of the culture of death, and that we have the power within ourselves to whim the death of the old person on their deathbed because we're the spouse or somebody else, or the death of the child in the womb because we're the mother. And both of those are grave evils that affect not only the individual but our entire culture. And that's why it is an excommunication to begin with.
We've got an email from MJ, And she says, Dear Colin, on this Thursday, October 29th show, Al Cresta, in his second hour, presented a thought-provoking question, and she paraphrases it by saying, where is the proof to support the notion there is a heavy emphasis on justice at the expense of mercy in the church today? It reminded me of this quote from Pope Francis in his closing remarks at the latest synod. I was about the synod bearing witness to everyone that, for the church, the gospel continues to be a vital source of eternal newness against all those who would indoctrinate it in dead stones to be hurled at others. It was also about laying closed hearts, which bear the closed hearts which frequently hide even behind the church's teachings or in good intentions, or in order to sit in the chair of Moses and judge, sometimes with superiority and superficiality, difficult cases and wounded families. In my own, albeit anecdotal experience, I see just exactly the opposite. Indeed, if anything, there is quite a lack of awareness of sinfulness, including for a very long time in my own life, and to this day in the lives of family, young and old. Many are only too glad to hop on quotes like the aforementioned, for instance, to justify their behavior and to head up to communion. My question is, what is the church's teaching on the relationship between justice and mercy? Are they equal? Two sides of the same coin, or must justice, as defined by God's law in the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes, necessarily precede mercy? Mustn't a person recognize how he has sinned in order to receive mercy? And if so, how does he or she objectively define sin, except as outlined clearly by God as Father and Son? If the church must serve as a field hospital for sinners, how do you convince someone that they need care in the first place?
Yeah, I think this is a complaint or an analysis that many people have made. I would make a number of points. The Pope is coming, usually these kinds of comments come in the context of a particular scripture of the day in what's called, as the Italians call the Feverino, the little, fervent homily that he gives daily. And so he's jumping off of a scriptural text, for starters. So what is Jesus teaching in those contexts? He's talking about a system, specifically the Pharisee system or the rabbinical system as it existed in his day, where you had these oral traditions, you had these 616 laws, I believe it was, and that these were the measure of righteousness. And so by compliance with these laws, the dietary laws, the Sabbath laws, and other things, that one accounted oneself righteous. You might say doctrinally correct and thereby also just before God. And he was criticizing that and saying that the knowledge or the holding or the affirmation of a teaching does not necessarily equal mercy. It may not even equal justice, because justice can be applied rigidly or in a vacuum in a way that's not understood by the church. Jesus himself said that he came not to destroy the law, but perfect it. And the fathers and the church since have seen the charity that Jesus came to teach us about as perfecting justice, that infusing it from the inside and ennobling it precisely so that it wasn't rigid. So on the one hand, there is this biblical rigidity of justice that the Pope is critiquing. That may also be the case today. I think people hear these things and they think, they're talking about Father Bob over at the next parish, who's always on his people about this, that, or the other thing. This is not what the Pope was talking about. He's talking out of the biblical context. Now, he then is applying it today, because obviously in the context of the Synod of the Family, we have to ask ourselves question. And the bishops especially, obviously, and the Pope himself, in carrying out the stewardship that has been given to them, that includes, among other things, the doctrinal teachings of the Church, a canonical law system that is founded upon true principles and therefore not in nature arbitrary, but is built upon essential principles of dogma and so on, and then how that applies in particular cases. There has always been in the church the idea of epikeia. In other words, that law itself only goes so far as the legislator who wrote the law can conceive of the cases to which it applies. But outside of that universe of possible cases, there can be other cases which he cannot see. These are the people that the Pope talks about as being on the periphery, who may be the collection of facts regarding their marriage or regarding this or regarding that, do not meet the conditions that the canonical structure requires. And so in the past, they would have been left abandoned or left to live as brother and sister in the church, or left simply to walk away from the church to continue to live as if they were man or wife when they are not. There has to be, with the application of the gospel, of truth and love, there has to be a way to try to capture all such instances. And I think that is the objective there, that we can't be so tied to the current laws that we have, the canons, the processes, procedures. Those are not given down from heaven. They've been reformed over their centuries. The 1917 code was based on Gratian and other things that have been introduced over the centuries. They collected the codes that should be a universal code, and they made the 1917 Code of Canon Law. It was revised in 1983. There have been revisions of it since, here and there, by John Paul II. So these are not carved in stone. As we gain more experience of using the canons to achieve the result that the canons are there for, then we see ways in which, well, maybe this could be done this way, and we modify the law because the law did not treat certain situations. So you can't, on the one hand, have a mercy which doesn't reflect the truth. That would be an error of laxism on one end of the scale. But you can't have a legal understanding which is rigid and doesn't acknowledge both the human character of such laws, based as they are, or at least as far as human beings can do it, on the divine law regarding marriage and the other realities touched on in the Code of Canon Law, which are not sometimes reformable in keeping with the divine law, in keeping with the principles in which law is made, but recognizing that, well, it can be done this way, it's better, it's more efficient, it's whatever. And so I think the Pope is encouraging people not to reject the idea of reform out of hand as, oh, everything's cozy, comfy, we don't have to do anything for these poor people over here, or on the other hand, take the position that, oh, no, these poor people are over here, they're suffering, they're difficulties we can't fit. We need to sweep away all law, and we just have to be mercy. That's not the answer either. There is in the middle, there is justice, and that means there is mercy based on the person open to grace, open to the truth, open to transformation of their lives, all the things that the Pope has also talked about in saying accompany people on their journey, and which the Synod Fathers, for example, also speak of in the final relatio of the Synod. So it has to be a both and. It can't be the extremes of rigid legalism or a lax mercy which is devoid of truth and connection to reality. There has to be a solution in the middle that accords both with teaching, truth that has been revealed, that is, and also with giving mercy where mercy is called for and needed. And I think that's what the church has to be about.
Cynthia would like for you to please discuss how a single adult expresses the domestic church in daily life. And that's from a Theology Roundtable discussion that you all had.
It's hard. The church has only used that expression in terms of marriage and family life. So even a married couple, I guess they could say they have the beginnings of the domestic church there. I'm not sure you can say that of a single person. What is the domestic church but a society? Because the church is a society. The old Code of Canon Law called it a perfect society and then developed that idea because all of the elements are there. And so you have the elements of the hierarchical order willed by God. You have the faith. You have the sacraments. You have the people of God, the head and the members and all of that. You have Christ the foundation, but you also have the visible sacramental orders. You have the married, faithful, the single, and so on. You have this hierarchical, you have this perfect society. In a way, the family is a natural society in which if there are Christians, and they are all Christians, that you also have the church in miniature, a domestic church. Domestic because we use that word regarding, ordinary everyday life in the family and in marriage and so on. So you may have an analogy to that, say, for instance, in a religious community, but I've never heard that term used with respect to that. That you have some single friends living together for mutual support and, holy reasons. You may have sort of a semblance or an analogy of that, but again, I don't see the church using it that way because really it's talking about the basic cell of society, which is also the basic cell of the church, and that is the family.
And quickly here in the last couple of minutes, Arthur from Cameroon would like to know how he responds to people who claim that the Pope is part of the Illuminati and wishes to bring about the New World Order.
Well, the Pope wants to bring about a new world order, but just not that one. Not one in which, in the theory or conspiracy of the Illuminati, a devil-driven world order, a devil-driven hierarchy of men who are controlling everything in every place. They used to say that would have been the Catholic Church or maybe the Jesuits. So I can see where they might be thinking that's going on today. But that's not the world order the Church wants to bring in. It's the order of peace and justice founded on Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus Christ and the life of grace. It is the only order that will actually work. Political orders, economic orders are fine insofar as they accomplish what they're intended to do. But ultimately, because of fallen human nature, they don't work. Only at the end, when God is all in all, will society be perfectly everything that it was intended to be from the very beginning. And the church is the sign of that perfect society, even if we too are not yet perfect.
Colin, thanks so much for your time. I'll let you go back to your nap now.
Okay, thank you. And my plate of turkey.
There you go. On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Elena Rodriguez, and our call screener, Matt Gabinski, both working overtime for this very special Friday after Thanksgiving edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday. We'll be back at it again Monday. John Martinoni will be in the house. Until we get together then, God bless.